Hello, I just came back from my Bushiroad Online Rumble in 2023, hosted in Discord in the Asia Pacific server. To start, I'm going to be showcasing my Oracle Think Tank Battle Sister deck. It made it to around 37 out of 150, so it's pretty decent, especially considering that it's store-bought and unedited, so I say I did pretty well, I guess. So the first card I have is my usual grade 0 starting Vanguard. When ridden upon, draw a card and get a quick shield if the opponent's unit is grade 1. It's standard, I guess. Next is these two copies of Battle Sister Semla. When Vanguard attacks hits, one of your units gets plus 3k. It's pretty okay, I guess. I mostly use her for variety so that I can proc from Ashe's skill. 10k shield is pretty good. I use it as well to, I don't know, guard the magic numbers, I suppose. She's a pretty okay card. There's nothing really noteworthy. The plus 3k is good, but it rarely ever procs. Well, I guess it could make some magic numbers, I suppose, but that's very specific and rarely happens. So moving on, we have two copies of Panatone. Panatone is really useful for offense and defense, mostly because the opponents, well, based on my experience, when you feel like you won't survive the next round, you use her skill, put this unit into your soul, look at two cards on the top of your deck, put one card among them to the top of the deck and one below, and the next trigger gets plus 10k. This is really good for when you want to survive the next turn and you want the opponent to use as much of their offensive resource as possible when you know that they haven't drawn a trigger yet. It helps because it basically gives you a resource advantage. And not to mention, when used properly, you can use it as a finisher skill to like stack triggers and hit a number so high that they just physically can't block, which has happened actually. And it's not that hard to do, to be honest. Just know when to use her and know when to place her, especially if the opponent has like board clear, because they will target her. Next, I run 4 copies of Cocoa. Cocoa is another one of those really good grade 1 cards. She makes the whole deck more consistent and removes uncertainty. You can use her skill, specifically the Act skill. Rest this unit, look at the top card of your deck, and put it on the top or the bottom. If you put it on the bottom, plus 3k on one of your units until the end of turn. Yeah, it's really good because it combos well with other cards such as Truffle, Fromage, Pralin, Torrillas, stuff like that. You can use her to check for triggers so that Pralin can safely enter the field. You can use her to spy for Torrillas so that you can safely use Torrillas' place skill and get a card. You can also use it to fake a trigger. For example, if you're up against a gold Paladin user who you notice doesn't like to take damage, you can like fake a critical trigger using it by resting it and checking the top and pretending that you've gotten a trigger. I mean, like, you don't have to outright say that you've gotten a trigger. Just act like it, I guess. It works like, I don't know, 7 out of 10 times, 6 out of 10 times. It really depends. Yeah, and not to mention, it adds more variety for your fromages. And especially with reverse fromage, because when you rest it, you can lock it and get a free draw. And you lose nothing because it's rested. Next, I have 4 copies of Battle Sister Torrillas. Torrillas is really good because not only is she a good column booster, meaning she can make great columns because of her plus 5k skill. When you look at the top of your deck, by an effect, this unit gets plus 5k, but also her on-play skill, which is basically when this unit is placed, reveal the top of your deck and if it's a card with Batsys in its name, you may put it into hand. It is important to note that this skill can only be used by one copy of Battle Sister Torias per turn. It is not card specific, it is name specific. That being said, it is really good for consistency. Comboing it with someone like, I don't know, Kokoa, I guess, you can pretty safely acquire certain cards like Choquette, for Choquette to scry for a grade 3 that you need. You can use it to get Fromage. You can pair it with Trifle so that you can get whatever extra Batsys Trifle is able to spy. Yeah, it's really good. Not to mention, once again, it has variety, which works well with all your Fromages. Next, I run 3 copies of Choquette. Choquette is mainly here for consistency. She has a plus 5k skill. When placed, soul blast 1, look at top 5, reveal 1 grade 3, shuffle the rest to the bottom, put the grade 3 on top, plus 5k. Simple as that. She can make things consistent. You can use her to look for a grade 3 heal when it is very much needed. Especially late in the game, when you know exactly how many triggers you have in deck and how many cards you have in deck, she can actually win the game for you. But aside from that, she's mostly useful in the early game to secure a grade 3 of some kind. It is also important to note that when you think that you have a lot of triggers in the deck, to perhaps not use her, because sometimes she can look at the top 5, spot no grade 3s, and instead you waste like 2 crits and 1 draw, because all of those goes to the bottom, and for the next drive check you won't get any. So yeah, it's up to you to decide how you use her, but for me personally, I use her only when I'm confident that I won't waste too much triggers, I guess. Not to mention, after you use her skill, I also prefer to like use her to intercept any attacks that I do not want to take. Like for example, I need 5k to guard a 2 crit regard. I use her to intercept, and she's pretty okay at it. It also frees up room for someone like Paladin, Trifle, and Waka, I guess. Next card is 4 copies of Trifle. She's really good. I run 4 copies of her. She's a mandatory unit for Battle Sisters. She has Sentinel Restrict, which on its own is really amazing. And when placed from hand, you can counter +1, check top 3, and call 1 Battle Sister. The only time that this is gonna be really bad is when, for example, you drew 2 draw triggers and drive check like 3 crits that aren't Batsys. Then you should think about whether or not you should use her, as sometimes you may be forced to call your critical trigger Battle Sister because you procced her skill. But aside from that one very specific situation, she's a really good beater. She hits 14k whenever you like check the deck, as she is boosted. And not to mention, aside from that, like I said, one very specific situation, her skill is her call skill is actually really good most of the time. You can call a Torias and use Torias' skill to get the other possible Batsys card that you weren't able to obtain. And then you can also use it to stack crits, to get a Fromage, stuff like that. It's really good. Next, I have 4 copies of Mocha. I actually prefer Mocha over Macaroon. Mostly because not only does Mocha pretty consistently reach 19k damage using her skill, if you have 3 or more units with Battle Sister of different names, this unit gets plus 5k attack, plus 5k shield. 4 or more cards, you get another plus 5k. But she also has a really good intercept, because she practically has 10k shield. It's really good. It helps build columns. It's very consistent. And not to mention, she's a really decent red line, because when rolled upon, you can Soul Blast 1, check top 2, and put 1 in hand, and put the second one to the top or the bottom. I know it says here that it should be placed on the bottom, but recently there was an erratum, so it has been corrected. It makes your deck more consistent, it refills your hand when you ride, it makes for a really good column, and it's a really cheap intercept. You get like a free 10k from a 5k grade 2. It's really good. I highly recommend her, along with Truffle and Torias, I suppose. Next, I run 2 copies of Prelin. Prelin is a decent beater, I guess. She's basically a massive stat stick. You can boost her so that she can easily reach like 80k attack, depending on the triggers and the usage of Panettone, I guess. But more often than not, she can actually reach that. She's really good defensively against Axel decks because often Axel can only boost their units so much. Depends on the Axel deck, but based on my experience, they often really don't touch her, mostly because of how bulky she is. And even if they do, it's like a really cheap guard, assuming that you want to guard her at all. So really, it's up to you. Next, I run 4 copies of Battle Sister Fromage. Skill, when placed, counter blast 1, so blast 1, draw 2 cards. And the other skill, discard a card from hand, look at as many unique Battle Sisters in the field from the top of your deck. So for example, you have 3 unique Battle Sisters on the field, you discard a card, and you check the top 3. Simple as that. Really good, pairs well with all your grade 1s, and it's pretty decent. You can actually use her draw 2 skill without going on the Vanguard. Like for example, you use Shuffle's skill and you call her to the rear guard circle, you can still use her draw 2. So when your situation is very morbid and your hand is just so bad, you can call her to the rear guard circle as a last resort to draw two cards. It's a pretty desperate move to do that in the rear guard circle, but it's better than losing, I suppose. If the opponent's Vanguard is grade 3, all your units get plus 10, plus 5k. So this is really good for column boosting again. Works well with Truffle, works well with Panettone, the usual. You also get a protect card, stuff like that. Next, I run 4 copies of Reverse Fromage. Reverse Fromage is interesting because this time, she requires a counterblast for her second skill. And aside from that, you can use her to like lock your rearguard units and draw as many cards as you've locked. So these two work well together because not only can Fromage 1 prepare you for Reverse Fromage by filling your hand, Fromage 1 can also, let's say, scry for the top, I don't know, 5 cards for example. And after scrying the top 5 cards, you can put 3 on top and 2 below to do a crit, to obtain certain cards, stuff like that. But also, Fromage 1 uses no counterblast whatsoever. So like, for example, you're running a game and the opponent is damage stalling you, you can use Fromage 1 to use your skill anyway. Fromage 2, however, is more aggressive, I guess. You can, let's say, lock 3 cards to draw 3. So for example, you check top 6, 3 of them are triggers, 3 of them are normal units. You can lock 3, get all the normal units, and leave all the triggers behind. It basically fixes up your deck and adds to your hand at the exact same time, at the cost of a counterblast. It's really good, and they work well together. And for every locked card, your front row gets plus 5k. So none of them, well, depends really, but they're usually not wasted, especially when your back row consists of copies of, I don't know, Cocoa or something. Next are the triggers. I run 4 copies of Psychic Bird, 4 copies of Ginger, 4 PG draws, and 4 heals. What I really like to do is to use, I don't know, something like, let's say, the skill of Pralin, yes. The skill of Pralin to reveal that I have a draw trigger, and beneath that draw trigger, I know that I have a normal unit, let's say reversed, followed by a crit. So the opponent will see like, oh, there's a draw trigger there, and not guard the next attack, or maybe perhaps say 2 to guard the next attack, and all of a sudden there's a hidden crit trigger beneath. So you can like fool them into thinking that you don't really have anything against them. It's really useful in that regard. But aside from that, 4 heals, 8 crits, 4 draw PGs. That's all. Thank you.